a conservative stronghold in California, but we understand that our communities are represented by a conservative narrative that is not representative of our communities. I joined the table as a community member who wanted to be able to actually join in solidarity with, to be able to build an API Latinx labor and environmental justice alliance to be able to achieve a progressive transformation that is greater, and not only for Orange County, but for the rest of the country. And for us, I think we want to be able to advance justice in the ways that we define it. I really think about the story of my mother, who helped define that for me about what organizing is. And I think now moving forward, I really believe in the fact that we have a legacy to be able to move forward in terms of transforming that for the future. So that is my origin story. Thank you for that. And I'm excited to be able to join this conversation.
Thank you. And I appreciate you speaking to justice in the way that we would define it. So next we have Judge Aaliyah Sabree, the Honorable Judge Aaliyah Sabree. She is a judge at the 36th District Court in Detroit, Michigan, where I'm from. She presides over the 12-member traffic division and manages over 1,500 cases a month. She oversees all the parking appeals and expungement hearings for the court. She also presides over the Street Democracy Program, which helps citizens and defendants who are homeless or at risk of homelessness get back on their feet. She began her career with the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office as an assistant prosecuting attorney in the Special Operations Division. In 2014, she was appointed by the mayor of the city of Detroit to serve as liaison to the city council. And prior to her current role, she served as associate general counsel for the Department Water and Sewage Department of Detroit. I know that she's also a graduate of Michigan State University and also a Delta and also a proud representative of the Black Law Students Alliance. So with that, Judge Sabree, will you please talk to us about your origin story, why you got involved in particularly rising to the level of judge, because that is something many lawyers graduate from law school but don't see themselves as actually being on the bench. So can you please speak to that for us? Judge Sabree, I think you're on mute.
That will help. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
All right. So as Jonathan spoke to it a little bit, my history goes back to my great-grandmother, Daisy Elliott, and she was a state representative, a legislator here in Michigan, and she wrote the Civil Rights Act for here in Michigan in 1976. So as a kid, I would campaign with her and I would go with her everywhere. She wasn't your typical great grandmother. She didn't do the cooking. She was out in the community. So it was from a very young age that I knew that I was going to be in public service. So fast forward, my mother's in public service. So is my father. And I always wanted to help the community. I noticed that a lot of times the judicial branch is left out of politics. It's left out of conversations. And then people complain or they say, oh, who was that judge that just sentenced me to so many years and it's too late.
Right.
And I wanted to become a judge at a young age and help educate the community also and help our community and with the things that we go on. I'm from Detroit, so we have a lot of other issues outside of just crime and economic issues. And I want to be a part of changing that. So my start, it was 2017 when I was appointed by a Republican governor, which a lot of people are surprised by. We're technically nonpartisan in Michigan as judges, but no, everyone was surprised that I was appointed by a Republican governor. And what happened is that I took a chance and put my application in and made some calls and did a lot of background work with it. And I say, you know what, when there's a Democratic governor, everyone's going to flood the gates from the same group of folks. So let me try as a Republican governor. And it worked. So I got appointed and then I had to run in 2018 to keep my seat, and I was successful and I still have my job. So here I am, and I'm happy to be here, really helping the community out. I'm in the district court where we have the most interaction with our community. So I'm able to help people get their license back, get them on their feet, get housing, register them to vote, all the things that you really don't think about when someone comes into court. So that's where I started.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And the district court in Detroit is also responsible, I think, for helping to suspend the evictions, right? Or at least to push back the eviction moratorium. Okay.
We did as long as we could, and we started back Monday. We were the last court in Michigan to start back with evictions. So, and we also have funding to help folks who are getting evicted still.
Okay, thank you for that. So again, representation matters. Representation matters. We're so proud of you. Okay, and so next, it is my honor to introduce Marie Turner, who is currently the Regional Field Director for the Campaign for Smart Justice, an ACLU campaign focusing on criminal justice reform and its many intersections. She's an Oklahoma community activist born and raised. In elementary school, if she was missing class, it was because she was at an HIV/AIDS awareness or LGBTQ advocacy conference with her mother. She grew up believing in the power and duty she had to change the world for the better. Marie also worked with the NAACP of Oklahoma, Freedom Oklahoma, CARE OK, so CARE, focusing on the intersections of racial justice, LGBTQ rights, and religious freedom. And working with these organizations, she researched the history of the criminal justice system, what it does to communities of color, Black women and Black womenex especially. And Marie Turner is challenging Representative Jason Dunnington, the Democrat in Oklahoma City, in the Democratic primary for the House District 88. Marie, tell us your story.
Yeah. So first of all, yes, Marie Turner. My pronouns are she, they. I come to this work of community organizing, like my bio says. I have been a community organizer for the majority of my life. That was the environment that I was raised in with my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles and my siblings. So some people know, some people don't. But when they start asking you what you want to be when you grow up, everybody in my family is in a public service field in some extent. And so my mother and my aunt and my grandmother and my uncle in public health work. And so what I knew at a young age, I didn't really jive well with people, but I knew I really liked animals. And so when they start asking you what you want to be, in first grade, I wanted to be a vet. And I'm just very kind of one track mind, like that's what I want to do and that's what I'm going to do. So I ended up going to college to become a veterinarian. And around my junior year of college, so I had already, but also knew about community service. Like I said, that was what I spent my free time doing, community organizing, community service projects, volunteering. That was just what I did throughout college. My junior year, so I'd already been working with the NAACP of Oklahoma and CARE Oklahoma. And we were putting on an event. CARE was putting on an event, and I got a call from my great uncle on my father's side, and he asked me if I knew about what had happened to my dad, and he was in a really bad four-wheeler accident. And so my mom and I, and serendipitously, he ended up in the hospital right across the street from the event that we ran. So my mom and I left, and we went to go see how he was doing. And so for the next week, because I lived in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and my internship was in Oklahoma City, where I live now, in House District 88. And so for the next week, I would drive down to the city, and I got to spend time with my father, with my baba, and I realized that we were more alike than we were different. And my father and my grandfather were in and out of prison throughout my childhood, up until I went to high school. And so we were still pretty estranged at this point in time. And so I got to listen to his story and realize that he wanted to become a teacher and wanted so many great things out of life. But in Oklahoma, and like you see across the nation, our Black and brown communities get one touch with the criminal justice system, and then it just becomes this cycle. And so at that moment, that week, I decided that I was going to leave the idea of becoming a veterinarian behind, and I decided that I was going to figure out how to correct Oklahoma's justice system. And I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do or how I was going to do that, but I started researching who was doing meaningful and holistic justice reform. I think one thing that we do a lot here in Oklahoma is we talk about the fiscal responsibility that our justice system puts on taxpayers, but we don't really talk about how that affects children and families and individuals before they're touched by the criminal justice system and long after they leave the carceral system, right? And so I was looking for who was doing that meaningful, holistic justice reform. And that was when I came across the Campaign for Smart Justice. So I did. My mom always tells me not to leave a job before you get another job. And that was one thing I kind of always kept in mind. But this was the one time I did it. So I left my job at the university. I was working in public housing, off-campus student housing. And I left that job and didn't know what I was going to do. So I took a study abroad trip to India and Sri Lanka. And while I had completed the interview process and while I was sitting over there, I got an offer letter for the job. And so that was like a sigh of relief. But what brings me to this work specifically and working in criminal justice reform is realizing how 1 in 2 Oklahomans is affected by our justice system, and about how realizing that some of my first friends from elementary school, by the time we got to middle school, were being tried as adults, and seeing what that hold looked like for my community and realizing that my story, while it was unique to me, wasn't a unique story here in Oklahoma. A lot of folks face that every day. And so that's what keeps me in this work, right? It's long and it's hard. And, but I wouldn't feel as fulfilled if I weren't doing work like this. So that's a little bit of my origin story.
So what is the one reason? Whenever voters vote, they usually have one reason that motivates them. What is the one reason? Let's go this in the same order. What's the one reason that voters need to come out this year and look at the down ballot races as well and become informed of the down ballot races as well? What is the one issue or reason that should motivate us to turn out strong? Jonathan?
Sure, I can share. So I think now more than ever, down ballot races are more critical to be able to pay attention to, and to be able to actually give an opening or a segue for a lot of our community members who have never participated in our democracy or who has been disenfranchised from our democracy to be able to participate in to be able to participate and hold folks accountable for the folks that we elect at the local level. I think one is the fact that it is now more important than ever as we actually focus across the country about how much our cities and municipalities all spend on police budgets, what it means for us right now to be able to actually reinvest and reimagine, what it means to be able to reallocate those dollars for our youth services, what it means to be able to reallocate those dollars for our most vulnerable populations in our cities, and to be able to have a really grounded understanding of what it means to be able to not only participate and have power in a democracy, but to be able to hold our leadership accountable and to be able to actually create a different culture of what it actually means for good leadership to be able to govern well in our city level that will actually translate to higher levels of office as city council members that we are electing now can actually aspire to actually govern that way when they go to the state and federal level. I think what we have seen, so I think for us in terms of the one reason to be able to vote is the fact that one, they get to be able to have an entry point and way to be able to actually see a name on a ballot and to be able to actually see then, therefore, after January or February, they get to be able to connect with that person. They get to be able to build a relationship with that person. And we actually transform the way and the expectations of how people govern. They do not govern by being able to have those expectations being won over every 2 or 4 years. They are winning that over by being able to have a relationship for 24 months or 48 months now. And so for us right now in Orange County, like we worked on our first sheriff's election back in 2018. We're coming back for it in 2022, but we are now like actually changing the expectations of what it means for law enforcement to be able to even play a part in our community now in Orange County. And so for us, what does that mean now as we actually challenge our local elections? And when we think about how much our local city and county boards are actually having power over our budgets and our resources that we're paying for, like what does it mean for us to be able to actually have a collective budgeting process for us to be able to actually advance that kind of vision of justice. So for me, like, that's what I'm really excited for. And like, I think that's what excites many people, is the fact that this vote not only means 1 in a million, but this vote really means is that they can make an impact immediately. So I think for me, like, that's the excitement that I have, and I'm excited to be able to hear from others what their reasons are too.
I love it. The idea of transforming the expectations of leadership. So being able to develop the relationship now as those elected leaders move through the pipeline and potentially get to state office and beyond. Judge Sabree, you consider to be that one reason we should be coming out and looking at those down ballot races?
Well, one obvious would be because I'm on the down ballot. I'm at the bottom of the ballot. So that's one solid reason why I would tell people to vote all the way down. But for one thing I always tell people, like, we, especially in this world and the way we live in technology, everybody wants instant change. And I always explain to people, your local elections, you will have change faster than your federal and your national elected officials. So I always tell that point because people want immediate change. And then I also talk about how to give examples. So, and I always talk about coming to court, and I hear it every single day. I don't even know who that judge was that was elected. I don't even know who that was that I was before. I have no idea. They don't have the knowledge, but they affect their lives. There are people who are being put away in prison who probably voted for these judges and never even knew that, or did not vote for any judges and allowed someone to come in who didn't necessarily have their interests at heart. So I always use the selling point that you'll have more direct change and you'll be able to have it a lot faster if you go down the ballot. Now, the good thing about Michigan, in my opinion, in 2018, we had a ballot initiative to take away straight party voting. So what that did was made people go all the way down the ballot. So while people were somewhat fatigued, they knew that if they just voted, put the little one Democrat or Republican bubble in, then they would not be voting for anything else. So it's causing people to go all the way down the ballot. And I do see some change in numbers based off of that initiative from 2018.
All right, you heard it right here. She's all the way at the bottom of the ballot, folks. Although I think we're nonpartisan. I don't know what we're doing right now, but she's at the bottom of the ballot, everybody. Make sure you turn out. And Marie Turner, please, you speak to your one reason. You've already somewhat addressed it, and I know you're on the ballot as well. So tell us what voters need to know, that one thing that needs to motivate them to come out and go and make sure they're checking all the way down.
For sure. I feel like I can definitely can plus one, I guess, as some organizers would say. What Jonathan and what Judge Sabree are saying is that like, it's important, and we see that we make a little bit larger impact when we focus on those down ballot races, things that are close to home. And when we talk about how our budgets and how our funds indicate what we really hold value in, right? What we prioritize. And so just kind of thinking about how this national conversation about divesting in prison and jails and reinvesting in our communities and our youth and what that really looks like in mental health services, right? And I think, specifically speaking to those that are from Oklahoma, what we have seen now is that specifically here in Oklahoma County, we got $48 million in CARES funds. And this week, our county commissioners voted to take $36 million of that and put it straight into our jail, rather than helping the folks who had been, facing this wave of evictions that we're seeing, rather than pumping funds into more PPE for students and what that really looks like, and rather than pumping those funds back into community members who are hurting and who are dying right now, right? And so I think about that when I think about our down ballot races, when I think about state, House, and representative races or House and Senate races, when I think about our sheriff's races, when I think about our court clerks, our county commissioners, and how powerful that is. Because this is a blatant disregard for what the people are saying. And in order to shout and truly mean that Black Lives Matter, right? That LGBTQ rights are human rights, in order for that to really hold something, right? When we are doing our rallies and our protests, we also have to vote in people who have their best interest at heart, right? And we see that right now the nation is at a time where we are asking for what's next. And our down ballot races are the people that are giving us that what's next, right? The things that really, the people really that change our societies, right? When I look at the panelists here and I look at the activists that we have across Oklahoma and right here in Oklahoma City that are continuously rallying and protesting and making a difference with their voices and their actions. Like, these are our faces of change, right? And the hope is that our down ballot races right now, it's not the end all be all, right? And I like this notion that down ballot races are not the end all be all, right? They are a marathon, that we are continuously pushing open a door for somebody else to come and continue that down ballot race initiative, right? Of people continuously making space for more people to come. Because I don't know everything, right? But I'm hoping that I'm making space for somebody else to come that knows a little bit more than me, that knows a lot more than me, right? To continue the work that we're doing. And so, and that in my life, time and time again, is where I've seen down ballot races show up, right? And my mom, like, my first instance of down ballot races was also like at the ballot box with my mom. When she was there, we were there. And she stressed the importance of civic engagement and of voting, specifically as women of color, as Muslim, as being queer, growing up queer. Like, these are important things. And I think one of the sayings that kind of sticks with me is like, you can't be what you can't see, right? And we need more diverse people stepping up, right? In those down ballot races that affect us even more pointedly than the presidential election, which affects us a lot, right? But making that immediate change in a meaningful way.
But to that point, okay, you can't be what you can't see. So to that point, what was the greatest barrier you faced? Each of you, what has been the greatest barrier? What do you perceive to be the greatest barrier for those who want to put themselves in the ring for local elected office or for public service? I'll give you one example. I know I've heard studies. I've read studies that have said that it takes a woman. It should be told 10 times that she should run for office before she starts to believe it. And I'll just go ahead and pontificate. It takes a mediocre white male, no times before he decides that he should run for office. So can you give me some examples of what the greatest barriers have been for you? And in terms of also getting over that hurdle about what that you should be in that place of leadership. I'll go to Marie.
For me, I guess there were quite a few, and I think about that stat often, right? That women have to be asked 7 to 10 times before they start to take themselves as seriously as their communities are taking them when they ask them to do something. And I think about how, for me, adding being Muslim on top of that, being queer on top of that, and being Black on top of that, I had those conversations anywhere from 20 to 25 times before I started to take myself as serious as my community was. But then on top of that, this was never the line of work that I envisioned myself in. I wanted to be a community organizer, and I wanted to live and die doing that. And I like being behind the scenes. And so when I hit the ground running doing community organizing, specifically here, my first question was, have you ever thought about running? Is that something you would do? I was continuously looking for the perfect candidate for this seat, and did not think that was me, right? And so people continuously started asking me. And so I think about that. But I also think about how I work in a field of work that is not very lucrative, right? And we see time and time again that politics is usually reserved for wealthy, middle class, upper class people who have wealth to put behind their name to finance their campaigns, that if they need to take off, that they can, and they don't have to worry about the financial strain. So in my work, I had to leave to be able to do to run my campaign, and I didn't have the financial stability to do that. The things that helped me through that time were the stimulus package that we got, and when taxes came back in. So that helped me through it. Now I'm back for a little while, and then I'll have to leave again. And so understanding that when we ask people to run, we have to be willing to actually help them figure out how they're going to do that. So personal finances, but also that fundraising ask, like our campaign was very unique, in having 400 individual donors for a house, like for a state house race, is something like almost unheard of. Right. And so we had to get very, creative with how we did that. And that's what I like. That's why I'm so thankful that I'm a community organizer. That's what we do. But when we say that, that we want someone to run, being able to really help them and understand like what that means. And then also having to wrap my head around, the fact that, I've been doing this work for a long time, and this is a job that I am ready for. Right. And so I guess shrugging off that imposter syndrome, and truly understanding what it means when we're asking people to put their livelihood on the line to run for office, and truly supporting them in doing that. Those were the two kind of main things, that hurdles for me to get over.
Thank you for that. And Judge Sabree, can you speak to your greatest obstacle getting out front, and also that fundraising challenge?
Absolutely. I have real stories. So, Maureen, I just want to say too, so I'm also Muslim, so I understand where you're coming from. I don't cover, but I'm still Muslim. That's the way I live my life. And I experienced it as a prosecutor. That's when it started for me, my legal career. And there would be people who would say to me, oh, wow, you don't seem like you would be a Muslim. And it's like, well, what does that mean? So even as a judge to this day, excuse me, I would tell people, I'm getting ready to celebrate my holiday. And they would say things like, oh, but you seem so this, or you're so this. So that's one barrier. And, being a woman, being Black. And then one thing that people forget about, ageism. You think about a judge, you think about typically an older white man. So not two challenges. One was the whole succession thing. We have someone in mind. It's not your turn yet. You should, this is more of a retirement job, or wait till you're about 50. And I'm like, well, the law says I only have to practice for 5 years. So why would I wait till I'm 50? So that was one thing. And the other was fundraising. So for me, this was my first time having to humble myself and ask for money. And that's something I don't like to do and did not enjoy doing. And when people give you money, they think that you owe them something. So I tried to run a very frugal campaign because I did not want lawyers giving me huge checks and then coming in front of me in court and giving me like a look like I give you $6,800 for your campaign. So I did more door knocking than normal. There are people who I've never had a judge come to my door my whole life. So it was more of that, more social media, and trying to find other creative ways to get to people, going to community forums, showing up to every single event, because you have to have connections with the community. You can't pay for votes. It's not all about fundraising. So I tried to take that challenge and turn it into something else, because I didn't like the fundraising part of it.
Can all of you speak to the use of social media to try to connect with voters? I mean, in the time of a pandemic, the door-to-door knocking is it is both dangerous for you, and also it probably not the most effective or efficient. How has social media been helpful to connect person to person with your constituency? And I'll start with Judge Sabree. I'm going to start with Judge Sabree, but Jonathan, I'm assuming you can also speak to this too in terms of civic engagement. So
Sure.
first Judge Sabree, then Jonathan, then Maureen.
In my opinion, I believe it's essential in this day and age, even before COVID. Like I said, I was running a Chief campaign, and I was on Instagram, Facebook, and I didn't do Twitter that much. But on your business account, you can see how many people go to your website. You can see how many people are on your page. It's way more effective than knocking on doors and calling people on the phone, like old school, or sending out letters. So I think if you're going to run a campaign in 2020 moving forward, you have to have social media presence, and it has to be real. It cannot be the fake, what I would call annoying ads over and over asking for money. Like, I think it should include, what are you actually going to do for the community? What's your true platform? Let me see who you are as a human being. But I think it's absolutely essential. And during the pandemic, whoever's running in 2020, I think they had a great advantage if they knew how to use social media, and their candidate did not.
And Jonathan?
Sure. So I think it is. I totally agree with Judge Sabree, and I think it's been, in some ways, it's really helped us reimagine what it means to be able to educate a voter about the scope and scale of what's actually at stake for at a local election. I think what's really interesting is the fact that now, because there's a push to be able to push voters to vote by mail, to be able to actually ensure that we're educating voters earlier, it's actually shifted the timeline in terms of like how we're actually educating voters and what issues and candidates we're actually prioritizing at the local level, and what it means for us to be able to educate at depth through social media. So what that means for us is that a lot of campaigns and traditional campaigns really focus on what it means to be able to actually lift up the visibility of a name of a local candidate. In large part, it's nonpartisan seats. Folks don't really have like a quote unquote Dem or Republican ticket to be able to actually vote down ballot. And so for a lot of our city council members, it's their first time they're actually just trying to get to know the person and know the depth of the issues that they represent. And I think for us, there's a lot of creative ways in which that we can actually engage and educate prior to October, which is when everyone's trying to scramble for who they're trying to vote for and trying to be able to get their name out there. I think for us, and I think because it can be done at cost, it's accessible for folks. And I think for a lot of the generation now, and for generations, it's often seen as like a quote unquote young person's tool, which I think is still true. And there's like a lot of accessibility for our families, parents and grandparents who are using this tool and are visibly seeing this too. And so I think for us, what we've seen actually is that it's actually helped fill the gap and the void for in-language outreach and resources in ways that I think the state or local governments don't really have access to. We found that like traffic for in-language East Asian and Southeast Asian languages for social media tools is a great way to be able to help build the infrastructure for how folks can actually be able to vote in a local election, where they weren't able to before because like the state or local government weren't accessible enough for our first generation monolingual voters to actually have access to. So I think for us, like those are just like really key, interesting points in terms of how to creatively use it and to be able to engage in a deeper way and have a relationship with an ad rather than actually being able to have exposure to one. So I think that's just something that I would love to uplift as well.
Perfect, thank you. And Marie, do you have more to add to that?
I mean, honestly, I guess all I can really say right about now is retweet. Like, for me, I grew up in an older generation, around an older generation, an older household. And so like the type of organizing I do is like that deep roots, like grassroots organizing. It was like going to church services with people, like praise in the park, like breaking bread with people, coffee shops, things like that. And so we had imagined this robust field plan, and then COVID hit. And it really just kind of blew a hole in all of that. And so we had to take a step back and like Jonathan said, like reimagine what it looked like. And which was really scary for me because I didn't have a social media presence really before that. Like I used my Instagram to post photos of my nephew and my friends. Like that was it. And so going like if people will like go back and kind of track, like we announced on, like I announced my campaign on February the 17th. It didn't make my first social media post until March 16th or something like that. Just because like social media gives me a lot of anxiety. But for me, it's always like the first thing is the hardest. And so it was like, it took me forever to kind of even think about like what that first post would look like, because it was like, how do you, it was almost like, how do you use social media, for me anyway, in a way where I'm authentic, but I'm just like, honestly, I'm very corny. And so like, I wasn't sure if I used social media in an authentic way, if that would drive people away or to the campaign. But like, that was also part of it, was like, we were able to turn out people in a primary election. So like I ran against Jason in the primary, and now we're moving on to the general election. So I got the Democratic nominee, I won that, but we were able to turn out a new electorate of people in the primary with the use of social media in meeting people where they are, right? Figuring out who our audience was, and meeting them where they are. And so like that, I'm like very, very thankful for social media. And I try to use it, I use it in a very candid manner. I feel like a lot of people know that I am not tech savvy at all. And so like, there was always like kind of mess ups with my tweets and things like that. But social media had created another way to kind of to authentically interact with people, and draw them to a campaign and a movement, right, where people saw themselves. And so, yeah, I'm thankful for social media now.
I know it is a blessing and a curse for me as well. So, and I appreciate you for retweeting me. And everyone else who wants to follow me, please follow me as well. And then forgive me for how I mistype on Twitter. So another question that came in from the chat is, how should our voters engage? So Jonathan, you spoke to the interest in using social media to both request your absentee ballot and voting early and trying to become informed early. But how are you encouraging all of your voters to vote for you in this crisis moment? Are you suggesting early voting? Are you suggesting voting by mail? If you could each speak to what your best strategy is.
Yeah, so for full clarity, I personally am not running, so I'm representing a table of organizations that are supporting that effort. But I think, just for clarity, I think I'm not sure if it's a blessing in disguise or like the awakening of the moment. But I think for us, what it's actually awakened to is like how to be able to continue to advocate at the local level of what it means to be able to create an accessible election, and what it means to be able to do that. For us, like we're working at the county registrar in California, in Orange County, to be able to actually explore like what it means to be able to expand like early voting days, and to be able to expand what it means like for what a vote center looks like in Orange County. So for us, for example, like there are conversations about what it means to be able to actually use a lot of our partner offices at scale to be able to actually know that like there's a trusted community organization who's offering their space and their time to be able to actually bring new voters in and to be able to provide in-language access. I think in every place of the country, I can imagine that there is actually a significant dip in having folks who are like non-English speaking voters to be able to actually access the ballot this year. Folks will have a ballot that arrives for the first time in their mail, and they'll have no idea what it is or what to sign. We found that there was 100,000 ballots that were not counted in California from the primary elections because it was not completed correctly. And what we assume is that it's a lot of people who look like us, like our parents, like our families, that are actually having their ballots returned. And what it really means for us in regards to that is that there has to be continued advocacy all the way up until election day to be able to ensure and measure what it means to be able to have an effective election in November. And I think for us, like it's the work that I think a lot of poll workers were older retired seniors who are actually offering their time, that were actually volunteering in polling locations. And a lot of those folks, because of COVID, are not going to be able to do that anymore. We have some significant work that we have to do to be able to ensure that folks are able to be able to participate. We found that voters of color in Southern California and specifically 52% are likely to still vote in person. So what does that mean for us as our communities show up to the polls? Is our infrastructure ready to be able to welcome with open arms voters who want to participate in our political process? And I think for us, like, that's the organizing work that we have still left to do to be able to ensure that happens. So I just wanted to be able to share that. And I think that's like some of the exciting opportunities that are left.
Thank you for that. Yes, we need to welcome our voters with open arms. I think that there's going to be so many challenges this go round. And I know in Michigan, there are drop-off boxes, or you can always go to your clerk's office to turn your ballot in. And I think voters also need to be aware of that as an option. Judge Sabree, what are you suggesting to voters? And I think at the end, if we could just make this the last question, Judge Sabree, and then Marie Turner, and then we'll wrap up.
So Elena, before even getting to the method of voting, what I'm still working on, and one of the struggles here in the city of Detroit and Wayne County, is registering to vote. So fortunately, in 2018, we had another ballot initiative to do online registering and doing it up to the day before the election. So that's helped a lot. But there are people who just have never voted. They don't see the importance of it or even registering. So I spend a lot of time communicating with people in court, outside the community, like, why? Just give me your why. And I explain it won't hurt you. So you won't be harmed by registering to vote. So we get past that. And then we have the primary and the general. Some people vote every general, but have never voted in a primary election. So just educating the citizens about how important a primary election is. So then after we get past that, then the method of voting. So you spoke on it a little bit, Elena. In Michigan, we do have the luxury of being able to vote in person early, which I like to do. I still like going to the poll. It's something about it to be able to fill it in and give it directly to someone. So we have that ability, and that will cut down on contact with others because it's usually very slow for in-person early. Then you can drop it off at the clerk's office. And for people and we have this issue now with the post office, for people who, if there are some conspiracies out there, or if they're not, I'm not going to get into that. But you can always just go right to the clerk's office and hand it to someone if you still want to vote or do it at home. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't push any way, but I just always tell people there are several ways to get it done, and you shouldn't have an excuse for what you're doing for not voting.
That's great. That's right. Let's get it done. And Marie Turner, what are you encouraging, or how are you encouraging? I know you're grassroots to the core. So how are you telling people to come out?
Well, I guess in this respect, Oklahoma is kind of grassroots. So we don't have all of those options. You have up until the week before the election to turn in your absentee ballot. And now our absentee ballots, like, you can apply for those online now. And so what Oklahoma has done is that because of COVID-19, they have allotted us the ability to be able to vote absentee. And all we had to do was put a photocopy of our ID or our a photo ID or our voter registration card. Now, when it comes to actually obtaining a photocopy of those things, there's a barrier there. And then also when we have to pay for postage to mail that in, there's a barrier there. And so we saw Oklahoma but actually enforce a poll tax to be able to vote in a healthy manner. So those are the things that we are trying to work through right now, community organizers and activists, when it comes to voting. And much so, like Judge Sabree, I don't advocate to do one way or the other, but I will say one thing I make sure I do is to try to help people figure out their plan to vote. So our early voting happens a week before the the weekend before the election, and only 3 days, that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and making sure that a tactic that a lot of people use is to request an absentee ballot. They'll get that, and so that way is how they. Because I also see like where Michael Tora has asked about how to get informed information, and so a lot of people will request an absentee ballot to be able to find out who's on the ballot, what's on the ballot, to research it before they go and vote in person. But when I was on the phones, that was one thing that a lot of people said that they were still doing, was voting in person, because they didn't know about that you could now get an absentee ballot and how to even do that. And so making sure that people just like know what is out there, because right now, even just a week before the primary, people still didn't know that there were other ways to vote other than voting in person day of. And so just making sure that we're doing all we can to share that information with our urban and our rural areas when it comes to voting.
That's right. All right, everyone, we are past our time, but it's been an important, very helpful discussion. And I think it's perfect to end on that note of everybody just have your voting plan and make sure you are informed and aware of the down ballot races. For more information, you can go to the ravenrespite.com, ravenrespite.com. And at 2:00, we have another panel on voting and protecting access for voters. So please go ahead and tune into that. I'd like to thank my distinguished panelists, Jonathan Paik, Judge Aaliyah Sabree, and Marie Turner. Good luck in your races. Good luck in the engagement. Everybody stay safe, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.